Welcome everyone to the Business Women Australia webinar. Our November topic is Ageism hurts us all, and we're really pleased to have you all here with us today. Whether you're here in person, virtually around this fabulous country, or whether or not you're watching a recording, we're really glad that you're able to carve some time out to really focus on this important topic that we're bringing to the discussion table today. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that we are all meeting around this incredible country we call home. It is the lands of various Indigenous traditional owners. I'm actually zooming in from Perth, from Bulu. This is the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. And I'd like to pay respects to all Indigenous elders, past, present, and those who are emerging, and particularly to hold in my heart this time of sadness for the 80% of Aboriginal Australians who did ask for a voice to Parliament, and we're unfortunately not able to get that through. We did try our best with Business Women Australia to raise awareness about that ask in setting up a committee that would give them a permanent voice. But we're hopeful that good things will still occur, and that we're really proud of the leaders that stepped up and the wonderful new rising stars in our community of young Aboriginal people around Australia who had the chance to step up, and we just encourage them to keep the conversation going. My name's Lynn Hawkins. I'm the National Director and founder of Business Women Australia. I've actually been working in this space now. We started Business Women Australia as a conversation many years ago, and actually established it in 2015 as a national collective. It's privately owned social enterprise owned by women, designed and co-designed by women, where we sat together and looked at what would be the values of a national collaborative community, with a focus on raising the profile and creating a platform for female leaders to be more visible in Australia. So that's essentially our shared vision. And when we got together, we recognised the importance of bridging women who are everyday working women who are leading the way as business owners or entrepreneurs, as directors or executives and managers within their organisations, across sectors, across professions, and across different roles, whether for purpose and not-for-profit, government, private enterprise, publicly listed companies. So it's one of the few kind of women in community organisations across all communities, where we bring together that real diverse and inclusive concept around leadership and what leadership means, not just as a title, but as a way of thinking and being, of self-leading and in leading others and in leading change, which is a great sort of segue into, I think, what we'll be tackling today. A lot of what we do is around our personal growth and what it is that we as professionals and as executives and leaders need to embrace and need to do to be the change in the world that we want to see. We worked together right at the very beginning with a bunch of women around our space to start off with. Before we even thought of our brand, we worked on what our values were. Our shared values around collaboration and open-mindedness, being courageous, being honest, having that conscious care and mindfulness around bringing a positive energy and optimism to being able to create a world that we're really focused on working together for the greater good. If you're on social media, which most of us are nowadays, there's no avoiding it. Certainly on LinkedIn, we're very active. We'd love you to jump onto and follow our company page. Every female in business, if they're working in Australia, are welcome to join our LinkedIn group. There's no cost in joining that group. We are obviously on our website. We have an events page. We have our member directory. There's loads of resources and recordings. We put a lot of great resources out into the public so that information is easily available and people can see who our leaders are within our community. And we have an annual Buzz magazine, which you can download if you jump onto one of the top tabs there in the menu. and you can download our annual Buzz magazine. It's full of great content and thought leadership. We're also on Facebook. We have a company page and a private members group. We are on whatever Twitter's called nowadays, and of course Facebook's Meta. And we are on Instagram, and whatever that's going to be called in the future, we will still be there. So our benefits are many, and one of the most powerful benefits that we offer our members is this opportunity to deep dive and share knowledge together. Knowledge sharing sits at the heart of everything that we do, because it is through education and knowledge that we can be the change champions of this world. There is obviously the opportunities that come with being visible and getting referrals for business. If we understand each other's businesses really well, we're more likely to refer within our communities and our networks to each other. I say we're your mates, not your market, but we do a lot of work in the back end connecting our leaders with the right audience so that they are getting their messages and their knowledge out to the right people. We've got a lot coming up, even though we're coming to the end of the year. Leanne, our wonderful coordinator who's online today, has been very busy helping us get all these wonderful events into the calendar. On the 14th of November, the wonderful Erin Clark will be featured on our Business Women Australia podcast show. She's going to be sharing the dark story behind codeless tech. She has been, and her team have been very successful using codeless apps to launch a tourism-based experiential opportunity called The Dark Story, and that's definitely worth listening to. Erin's got a background in innovation and technology, and she's a great believer in the power of codeless tech to be actually bringing apps into business and community usage. So if that sounds interesting to you, come along, join and listen to that podcast. If you don't catch it live, you can head to any of your favorite platforms to listen, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, iTunes. We have our Business Women Australia podcast show streaming across most of the platforms that you'd expect. On the 15th of November, we have another online webinar, Understanding Women's Health with Dr. Sasha Fulton. The wonderful Leanne Jeffrey will be interviewing Sasha around the important aspects around women's health. And on the 22nd of November, our Melbourne end-of-year lunch will be hosted by Jessica Schubert and our leaders over there in Melbourne. That's tickets are selling fast for that, so make sure that you jump on if you're in Victoria for that one. And on the same date in Perth, we have our end-of-year celebration, Stories, Bubbles and Wonderful Burlesque. Again, Erin Clark and the team will be hosting that in the CBD. So the 29th of November, Sydney will be having end-of-year celebrations. I'll be over on another work-related matter while I'm in Sydney. We thought we'd get a group together at Zephyr Sky Bar for a dinner. And on the 8th of December, our final podcast for the year, the wonderful Martina Saudi, who's a senior executive in the cyberspace at Microsoft, is actually going to be discussing diversity and inclusion in the workplace from her perspective. And she's got some great lived experiences that she wants to share around that as well. So lots coming up. If you're not a member, we'd love you to join. Every dollar that our members put into Business Women Australia goes into the development and the implementation of all these great co-designed ideas that our members come up with. And our premium members are our leaders in our community, and we work with them to design content around the important issues that need to be shared across the calendar every year. So every dollar that we make goes into producing more of these kind of programs for women. Our shareholders don't take any dividends. It's purely a social enterprise. So we really appreciate the financial contributions of our members. Leanne is online today. I suggest you reach out to her if you are interested, if you've got ideas about Business Women Australia, if there's topics you want to see, if you want to join, if you've got any questions, Leanne at businesswomenaustralia.com.au. So we're over the formalities of today from a Business Women Australia welcome point of view. I'm so excited about this topic. Ageism hurts us all. It's such a good topic, and it's the wonderful Tracy Cooper who brought this topic to us. She's a leading member in our national collective of Business Women Australia, And her passion and experience in effecting change really means that she's sought after as a facilitator and a change management specialist. She translates the theory and practical knowledge into a proven approach to support leaders and teams to enhance their performance and lead change within their organisations. And we're going to see a bit of a taste around the sorts of tools that she utilises. I always love collaborating with Tracy because it always turns into a very practical, sort of lots of takeaways. So her early career was in agricultural science, and then she transitioned into this sort of developing leadership programs predominantly in rural and regional communities, but also in metro areas with organisations that are national and international too. So based on the learning that she's had and the experiences that she's had in delivering leadership programs, she joined forces in 2001 with the fabulous Maria Nolan, who's her business partner, who's online with us today. They launched SeeChange Consulting, and 22 years of action learning, we're going to be able to tap into those kinds of opportunities today. So they use the Prosky change management methodology. If you're interested in change management and you've got change going on in your organisation, and we all are, let's face it, it's definitely worth having a chat to Tracy and Maria. They've been creating programs that have brought absolute change, not just for businesses and communities, but also for individuals in terms of how they cope and how they're actually able to best cope with and manage others through those change programs. So they've had experience in financial services, in agribusiness, in local government, and in for the not-for-profit sectors. So very passionate women, and their optimism's absolutely infectious. So it's with absolute gratitude that Tracy has brought this webinar together with us, and in introducing us, of course, to the fabulous Patricia Sparrow. Now, for those of you who maybe from interstate may not have come across Patricia, she leads COTA Australia. That's the peak body for older Australians. So she's got a very important role to do, and she's totally committed to this. Her lifelong work has taken her to this place where she's bringing a very constructive approach to building an inclusive and bright future for older people. I had a look on the website and noticed that the definition of older people is anyone over 50. So I'm obviously in that space. So I'm like my mum. She died, I think she was 98, and she was saying to me about a month before she died, she still hadn't worked out what she wanted to do when she grew up. And I've got a very similar attitude to that. So I'm really looking forward to how we can really tap into Patricia's her expertise. Her career spans community, disability, aged care, health and advocacy roles. And she's bringing to this table an impressive experience from the perspective of not-for-profit, public service, advocacy, and working in a ministerial office. So she's survived so many different scenarios, and that resilience is going to be really obvious, I think, as we start to get into her experience. So she's worked consistently to improve the choice and control older people have in their own lives. And she's working very hard to reform aged care and to fund not individual care, to fund the individual's care rather than the providers. So she's really very much focused on putting the person centric to any model of service delivery. So I'm really excited to be able to hand over now to Tracy Cooper. Tracy, can I just hand over to you now? I think I've even bitten into some of your time.
Oh, that's okay, Lynn. I'll just share my screen now with some bits and pieces. So
excellent. And just Leanne, there's a couple of people in the waiting room. You might like to let them in. Thanks.
Well, Lynn, that's been a fabulous introduction. Thank you very much, and your very kind words. And all I can say is I've been a premium member of Businesswomen Australia now for a couple of years, and before that I was involved. But it's a fun group of women, but it's also, I don't know, when I go to the events here in Brisbane particularly, there's something about that brings the women that come together there, and I like, you know, mates not market. That's what I've found. It's been I've made some new friends out of Business Women Australia, and I really enjoy it. So I thank you for the opportunity to share this with you today. So along with Maria, my business partner, excuse me, we're going to share with you and run a session like we would normally, but it's fabulous to have you with us, Pat Sparrow. So thank you very much for joining us. So one of the first things we do, we like to make things very interactive at SeeChange, is I'm going to ask you this question, and it's up to you if you feel comfortable to contribute. Maria's the techo behind the scenes. We're doing a Mentimeter here and collecting thoughts. So how would you define ageism? So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you've got your phone handy, if you can basically put your photo up to that and get the on the QR code, and it'll take you to a section in Mentimeter, and just type in your response. This is not a test. This is just, what do you think? What's it mean to you? How are we traveling, Maria? We've got a few responses.
Yes, we do, coming in.
I love this because it actually just creates diversity in thinking to start with. Okay, we're about to show you what the responses have been. You're on mute, Lynn.
You might have to stop sharing so Maria can share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. I'll just let you read some of those. Mm. Some similarities there, and then there's some different ones. What I pick up is it's interesting that it's not just about the aged, it's also about young people. So and that's a good platform as we kick off. Oh, there we go. Negative attitudes about age, older and younger. What would you know? You're too young. You know, that type of stuff. So thank you. That's a good way to kick it off, just to see what people are thinking and their experience. So what I'm going to do now, Maria, if you could stop sharing, I'm going to invite Patricia she's going to give us a presentation of some of the thoughts and her very vast experience in this field. And that's a good platform, I guess, for you there, Patricia, to see what people are thinking. And yeah, so I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. And look, I think we've got a pretty educated audience in terms of the way you defined it, which is fantastic. But what I am going to do is talk about the different forms of ageism and also age discrimination, which is a little bit different. So I'll try and take you through some of that. And you absolutely picked up on why this talk is called Ageism Hurts Us All, because it is about older people, and scarily, discrimination in the workplace starts at 45. So our membership is from 50 years of age, but and there's a stat that's amazing that 1 in 3 recruiters won't consider employing someone over the age of 50. And so, you know, but technically it starts at 45. But exactly as Tracy was saying, we also hear that ageism against younger people too. They're not going to stay in the job. They don't work as hard, you know, all of those things that actually are not fair to say about anyone. But I'll take you through the different forms of ageism, because it's actually really key to the sorts of things that we need to think about. And I want to start with one that we don't think about a lot, and it's actually internalised. So it's what we accept as normal about age and what we believe about others and about ourselves because of age. And I use, you know, it probably seems a trite example, but I use, you know, I still dye my hair, colour my hair, because I got told at a younger age, and I do see it. People don't listen to grey-haired old ladies. And so that stuck with me. And I hear older women who are grey say we become invisible. People don't see us and they don't talk to us in the same way as they used to. And so that's a trite example. And of course, there are a lot of things that we do that are worse than that. But I use that one because it's often understandable for people about, you know, do I limit myself because of age? What do I do to sort of counteract people thinking that I'm older? And I turned 60 this year. And people will say to me, as a compliment, that they think I don't look my age. And sometimes I'm insanely happy about that. But really, what's wrong with looking 60 and actually being 60? So I think, you know, we make a whole lot of assumptions that somehow it's better to be younger. And I don't think that's the case. I think we have to sort of accept ourselves at any age. And I think if you accept yourself at any age, you can actually get on and do the things that you need to do. And if we don't tackle that, how we internalize ageism, it's really hard for us to address some of the other forms of ageism that I'm going to talk about now. The next one I want to talk about, again, that's not very well understood, is about benevolent ageism. And this is ageism that's not coming from a nasty place. It's not about people trying to do the wrong thing. They're trying to do the right thing, but they've made all sorts of assumptions about an older person. And I'm going to mostly talk about older people while acknowledging that it affects younger people. But they assume that there's a frailty, that people are less able, and that they're vulnerable and needing protection. And this is how we actually start to limit people's autonomy and agency. And we see that particularly as people age. I'll give you a couple of examples of this. There's been some work done recently by the Human Rights Commission in aged care. And they went in and they interviewed workers in aged care who said, no, they weren't ageist at all. They worked in aged care because they loved and cared about older people, and they wanted to make sure that they got good services, which is terrific, right? But then when the trainer started to talk to them about ageist attitudes and what sorts of things, you know, does that mean? Some of the workers went, oh, actually, I go around and I yell at all of the residents because I assume that none of them can hear me. And that will be true for some people, that you need to speak up, but not for everybody. But there was an overlying assumption that everybody that was in that nursing home, as it was, she would need to raise her voice because they wouldn't be able to hear her. And I'll tell you a fabulous story. I actually had dinner with this woman last night in Sydney. I love her to pieces. She's 94. She's an amazing spokesperson on this issue herself. But her story that she tells me was being invited out to dinner, and sitting at a large table, and the young waiter came around. He was offering everybody drinks, you know, red wine, white wine, spirits, whatever you'd like. He came to her and he looked at her and he said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And she said, "No, I would not like a cup of tea." And he said, "Would you like a sherry?" So again, making assumptions that this older woman wouldn't be able to drink alcohol. And she said, "No, I'll have a glass of your, you know, punch in the face Shiraz, please." And this is the kind of thing, he didn't mean anything by that. He probably thought he was being kind, but actually it kind of, it limited the way that he was seeing her. And we do see in aged care and in health and in a range of areas where this is done because assumptions are made for good intent. And that's probably why I'm so passionate in aged care about how do we make sure that the person's front and centre, because you hear all the time. Actually, something came up on my LinkedIn recently. I made a comment. We've got a new Aged Care Act coming in. It's going to be rights-based, really important. People are shocked that it's not rights-based now, but it's not. It's going to be rights-based. And I said the most important thing to get this act right is to listen to the views of older people. And sure enough, one of the comments came on, but sometimes they might not know what's good for them. They might not act in their best interest. And I think, you know, this is a sign of this benevolent kind of ageism. He's probably a very nice man who's trying to do the right thing, but he can't see that an older person will have a view. And I don't know what the magic age is where I'm not going to know myself and what will be good for me. There might come a time where I have dementia and I need someone to support me in decision-making, but there'll never be a time where I'm not me and I won't have the ability to say what I think is right for me. And so keeping people's autonomy and agency is incredibly important. And then what we see, unfortunately, is systemic ageism. And this is where we have systems and structural barriers that are put in place based on, and in part it's because there's internalised and benevolent, and then there's a systemic view about what older people are and aren't capable of and what things they should and shouldn't be able to do. And so systemic ageism talks about how society limits and discriminates against people. And again, this is true for younger people, but I'm focusing today more on older people. I think I've got some examples on the next slide, Tracy, that some of these kind of more systemic, which is age discrimination. So age discrimination occurs when a person is treated less favourably than another person in a similar situation because of their age. So it's slightly different from ageism, which is a little bit more about how we think and feel and see people. This is more about when that's used to treat someone less favourably. It involves ageist practice and behaviours, and that arises from those stereotypes and attitudes and assumptions we were just talking about. It can be direct and indirect, and the indirect is actually, even sometimes the direct is really hard to prove. So you hear all the time people saying they were made redundant, and they're not made redundant. The official reason that they're not necessarily made redundant because they're over 55, although sometimes they can be. Or people won't hire because they say someone's too old to do something. And I heard this discussion today about Joe Biden, the president of the United States, people saying, is he too old for the job? Is it time for him to move on? And then there's more indirect, which is where the conditions and requirements or practices which treat everyone the same, but actually they disadvantage people because of their age. And we're seeing this particularly at the moment with the increasing digitalisation of everything. People in their older age, this is an issue that probably will wash out of the system over time, but right now for people over 65, when we look at the digital inclusion index over 65, it is more difficult for them to get online, to do things online. Banking is all going online. We're going to a cashless society, although maybe we'll rethink that tomorrow after Optus and some of the challenges that caused for people. But, so while everyone's being treated the same and we're all going to live in this digital world, there are some people, older people, and actually people with disabilities too, who will be left out of that. And so this is where we see indirect discrimination against people, either on the basis of their age or because they can't do something that everyone's assumed to be able to do. Thank you. Go to the next slide, please, Tracy. Now, here are some real examples that might surprise you. So there are insurance policies that cost more for older people. So to travel, if you're in your late 70s or your 80s, even if you're well, so I've got someone in my family who's 80 currently in the UK, they nearly didn't go because the cost of insurance was so prohibitive. He's well, there's no reason he can't travel, but the cost was so much that it nearly put their trip to see family they haven't seen for 3 or 4 years. It's important to all of us. It nearly put them off. That's one of the reasons that a long time ago, COTA actually worked in the space of creating some insurance that was particularly for older people and looked at how you support older people. And they actually took COTA insurance to be able to afford their trip. You see banks refusing older people credit cards because they don't think that the person is going to be able to continue to service the loan. And that's regardless of the fact that the person might have quite a lot of superannuation. And we know one of the public debates now is that there are people dying with large amounts of superannuation not used. May have been refused a credit card because people don't see superannuation in the same way as they see any other income. And that's something that has to change. I've been advised to make sure that I don't pay my mortgage off, and this is something that people get done. Keep a little bit so that you can actually borrow against your mortgage, because if it's an existing loan, you can't be discriminated against. As you know, we've talked about the increasing digitisation. We're seeing HR practices that rely only on online job application software. And some people are doing that deliberately to filter out applicants because of their age. And some people are just doing it because they think this is the way business is done now. But what they're doing is closing themselves off to the benefits of employing an older worker. Now, many older people can use this software. I'm not saying it's all older people who can't. I'm just saying it's an example of if you just do things one way, you actually block a range range of people who might be perfect for a position that you have. I've already used that 1 in 3 recruiters won't consider employing someone over 50 because I find it so shocking to think that, you know, as I'm sure you all do, if you're over 50, to think that people won't consider bringing on your expertise. But we also see, as was said earlier, that younger people, they're too young, what will they know? And we do see, I once did a talk back on ageism, and we were talking about the benefits of, you know, age diverse workforces, making sure that you have older and younger workers. And actually some of the older people were being quite ageist about younger people. So it was really quite interesting about, again, it's the assumptions, and it's not that one group of people is more ageist than another. We've all got it. It's all that internalised and benevolent ageism sits within us. But we do see workplace policies that prioritise younger people for training and professional development, and older worker for redundancies. And there are also things like mandatory medical examinations for someone to retain their driver's licence, regardless of their skills or competence. It just becomes something that you have to do. And so there's a whole range of things that we think, they're just a few examples that I thought might be interesting to you, because you probably wouldn't think about them. And you might have experienced some of them yourself with jobs. So I think they're really practical examples to understand how we see age discrimination play out. But I do want to talk about, I know we've got a gentleman on the line today too, but there is gendered ageism. It's a double whammy where it brings sexism and ageism together for women. And I think, you know, I blithely sort of say, you know, men become silver foxes, and we talk about that and we kind of almost celebrate that. But women don't. Women become more invisible. And that's a trite example, because actually what happens is that there's a significant impact on health, employment, income, access to services and resources that many women have experienced throughout their life, and then it becomes, you know, even more pronounced as they get older. And as a female, you know, we are more likely to experience ageism. And I'll give you 2 examples. Being in went to a new gym that I was going to. They gave me a fantastic presentation on all of this. I was clearly the oldest person in the group. No problem with that, until they started talking about anti-aging products and anti-aging things. I became the only person they focused on in the room. And I talked to them afterwards about, I think what you need to do is focus on positive aging. And positive aging is really important at any age. So again, it's this thing about we're actually all in it together, and we shouldn't be distinguishing people based on the basis of age. But we experience more persistent poverty than older men as we age. So more than 1 in 5 women over 65 experience poverty, and in a 7-year period or over a 10-year period, compared to 16.5% of similarly aged men. And we know that women over the age of 55 are one of the fastest growing groups at risk of homelessness, sleeping in cars, couch surfing. It's a serious issue. We also understand that they're more likely to experience ageism when they're seeking medical treatment or health-related services. And you will often hear for women, but also for men, you know, that depression somehow is something that just happens as you get older. It's not an age-related issue, but people are, I think it's getting better in that space, but sometimes people are less likely to get support for depression or something like that, because it's seen as a normal thing that happens when you age, and it isn't. So gendered ageism is a really big issue, which isn't to downplay the ageism that occurs against men, but there is this double whammy for women that brings sexism and ageism together. And one of the things that I want to see happen and driving towards is we want ageism to be seen as seriously as sexism and racism. And that's not to say that sexism and racism have got things solved, and we know that that's not the case, but we don't talk about ageism in the same way. There's a community conversation now about sexism. There's a community conversation about racism, with a lot more work that we need to do on both of those fronts, but there's not yet that conversation on ageism, and that's what we really want to spark, so that we examine our own attitudes and we start to address those systemic ageist structures that limit us all. And I think I'm handing back to you, Tracy.
Yeah, Yes, you are. Well, Maria's going to drive this part of it with, thank you, Patricia. That's, I love your examples because it helps us understand it. I'm a bit of a practical person. So when I can hear the example, and I was nodding because it happened to me recently about a bank loan. They wanted to see my superannuation to see if I had the ability to pay it off because was I going to retire soon? So that was the question.
There you go.
Yes. Yeah. So over to you, Maria.
Yeah, so thanks, Patricia. That was great. And I know the first time that I spoke with you about ageism, it was an awakening. But mine was particularly about younger people. I was just thinking it was about older people. And it resonates with me. My mum has dementia. She's in an aged care facility, and I just had to speak to them the other day about yelling at her. Her hearing is fine. And they speak more slowly, like she's stupid. They don't mean to. They don't mean to at all. It's just they were trying to help, but I had to highlight that they didn't need to do that. So what we're going to do now for the next part is I'm sure you might have some questions now for Patricia about understanding a little bit more about ageism. So we'll just go to Mentimeter again. That's the same one that you were in before. If you would like to just pop in any questions you've got, and Patricia then is going to, in a little minute, have a discussion or share responses to any of those questions. We won't have time to do them all, clearly, but at least Patricia will have those on the Mentimeter. She could possibly respond at another time if we can't get through it. So, yeah, so if you'd like to pop in any questions that you have, or you can have comments as well, that would be more than fine. I will just share my screen so we can have a look at questions.
While people are putting their questions in, I should say that in that aged care example, what was really interesting was that the Human Rights Commission had done some training around ageism, which was only like an hour to an hour and a half for workers, and that actually really changed their attitudes. So, you know, it's having these kind of conversations and some training means that we can actually turn some of this around quite quickly, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and in my experience, Patricia, in aged care would be absolutely, because even when I've mentioned it to some of the carers, I can see that's different now.
Yeah,
they just didn't know. They just didn't know.
Exactly. So I can see the questions in there, which are a lot about how do you actually try and sort of shift the dial on this. On training, that human rights example that I gave you is the clearest one that we've got. And what was really great about that was it is about talking about attitudes. Because people don't know exactly what you're saying, Maria. People don't necessarily know they're doing it, and it's not coming from a negative place. So it would seem at this stage, I think there's some more work that needs to be done about how we embed this, and probably need to embed it in schools from a young age. But there does seem to be a point of quite quick, incisive sort of training that helps people to pick up the issues and adjust their attitudes. So I think that's really important. I think it's not really a training thing, but I think one of the other things that we need to see is people getting older as a very normal and natural kind of part of life. And I think we're starting to see, sometimes we're starting to see famous women in particular, and that resonates through the community. I saw some fabulous things from Jamie Lee Curtis, I love, but people like that who are talking about their experience of aging and owning their age becomes really important into how we shift a societal view. It's really important with the talk there about bystander tips and what can you do. I think if you see it, it's the same with sexist and racist things that we see. We should be calling it out, and we should be pointing out to people that that what they're doing is ageist. And Maria, that's what you've been doing at your aged care home, and you're finding that actually that is having some resonance, and people are going, that's not what I intended to do. So I think that's really important. I can see that when we're going to talk a little bit about personal experience in one of the breakout groups, so that will be good. And some of these I might need to come back to you about for the government to educate on TV or TikTok. Yeah, that's something that, we're starting to think about how we do this. I think government's interested in the intergenerational lens, and that's a lens that we're looking at, and how we do that, because what you don't want to do, and we see this in the public discourse a little bit, is pit one generation against another. And so I think whatever we do on TikTok or TV, we need to make sure that we are making it across ageism hurts us all, that it affects us all, because that means that we all invest in it differently. So that's really important. On some of the research and statistics, I've got a couple of colleagues on the line, and maybe what we can do is send something through later if we think there are really spot on stats and research we can give you. One of the things that I should say too is where we've got intergenerational connections, that works really well. And I'm sure some of you have watched nursing homes for 4-year-olds or seen the wonderful ones with teenagers. It just makes people get to know you at a personal level and see you quite differently. I was crying the other day with a woman talking about her husband who was demented and going in to visit him and how difficult it was. And you could see that teenager really seeing for the first time a woman who's the love of her life no longer knew who she was, and that, you know, was violent when she went in. And I think that sort of created quite a different experience and understanding that this is just a person, same as me. Because if we're lucky, we're all an older person waiting to happen. And I think that's, you know, the other kind of approach we need to take. On summits and conferences, that's the sorts of things that we're looking at doing. So interested in your ideas about what you think would happen. And I can see here that one of the comments here is about gender public reporting to government. And yes, we are thinking about in our advocacy, how do we do something similar in ageism? And I think the time's ripe, because actually with workforce pressures and shortages, they want people to stay in the workforce for longer. And many older people want to stay in the workforce for longer. So we've got some work to do about reporting and holding organisations to account, but also to opening up people's minds and ideas about what older people can and can't do. And as said earlier, the thing about the workplace is we know from research, and I can't tell you exactly what research, but I'll find it for you, that actually multi-generational workplaces actually perform better. When you've got a mix of age, a mix of gender, you actually get more productive workplaces. There's a lot of this information I'm talking about that you'll actually find on the Australian Human Rights Commission website too. They've done some amazing work. We had Dr. Kay Patterson, who's just retired as the Age Discrimination Commissioner, and she did some fantastic work in this area. But I'm conscious I've probably used up all the question time, but we will try and send you through some links maybe following the webinar.
You did great, Patricia. You're good with your time limits, doing very well. And I think what we're going to do now is, because we do want to make it interactive, we are going to go into a breakout room. So Leanne's going to help us out and we'll just put us into different groups. And there's a question that I want you to first consider, because we do want to hear from people's experience and what is it that you have. Just one moment and I'll get up my... So the first question that we have is, what's your experience of ageism? I just gave you one the other day when I was talking to the bank about a bank loan, and they said, yeah, but can you pay it back? Are you going to retire? You know, like it was just, and I was a little bit offended. They wanted my superannuation statement. And I thought, isn't that a privacy thing? You know, like I thought that was something. So I actually thought of you, Patricia. I went, I think that's ageist. I think that's ageist. So we're just going to take a little bit less time. We're going to do 8 minutes in the breakout rooms, and we'd love you to just, if you haven't got any ideas, they may come to you, but what's your experience of ageism? Because we'd love to hear from people in the group. So over to you, Leanne, to send us into groups. Oh my goodness.
and
Yeah.
it's time for her to go anyway.
Yeah.
So
That's the
restaurant or
old
something, a
barnacle.
saffron restaurant barnacle.
Mm.
Yeah, so thank you, ladies, in my breakout room. It was great. We had a great conversation.
Okay. Did we have a third room, Leanna, or was it just 2 rooms?
We did. I was
We
in a
did.
room, but
Yes.
I had Sian and Tony. So I don't know if Sian or Tony want to report back. No, Sian's shaking her head. I don't know if Tony, if you do.
No,
I'm
go for
I'm
it.
happy to if you don't want to, but I've talked a lot already. No, it looks like it's me by default. We actually had a really good conversation. Can I just acknowledge Maria and Sophia, who are my fabulous colleagues? And Maria's put some links in the chat for you with some of the research that I was mentioning and couldn't recall exactly where it was. And both Maria and Sophia are very skilled, and I'm lucky to have them as colleagues. In our group, we actually talked about the fact that you can be both a victim and a perpetrator of ageism, and that we had all done and said things that when you look at it through this lens, you realise is ageist. And we talked about it at both ends of the spectrum. And Sian was talking about her, 14-year-old who, because there's a problem with youth crime and they're out on their skates and stuff, that people are assuming they're part of a youth crime kind of gang. So seeing it at that age. And Tony told a lovely story about her grandmother who ran a family company that was, and I can't remember the exact name, but it was and Sons, and that the assumption that was made that it meant that the company was headed up by the male of the family, not the grandmother. And so look, I think there was that view that it does actually happen at both ages, but also that for all of us, we both contribute to that. And that's the sort of thing that we really have to stop. That's that internalized and benevolent kind of ageism, as well as, tackling some of the things that mean that people just do it automatically. Feel free to add anything, girls, if I missed anything.
No one
No.
wants to add anything? Hang on, I've just got a bit of a freeze on my slides here. I think I can just comment on that one, Patricia. We have a family business in our family, and it's called JP Cooper and Son. And it's my sister and I are the directors of that company, but people think it's men. So no, well, there is a brother there, but yes, it's yeah, it is. It's that was very traditional, wasn't it? In the past, it was always and Sons. So okay.
But our view in our room was that even though that was some time ago, it probably hasn't changed significantly, that would still be the assumption.
Ah, okay. Yeah. And, I want to talk to, I'm going into the man bit here, but I want to talk to a man about that. Yeah. Not so much age. Okay, thank you. That was breakout 1. So what I'm going to do is just give you a little bit and make this link. We'll go back into breakout room shortly, but I wanted to give you, and Maria and I have put this together. How do we reduce it? Like we've talked about examples and what we see, and how do we reduce it? And I guess for Maria and I, who are change management consultants, who we normally go into organisations and help make some change happen with what's happening within that organisation. It can be new software or a restructure, but this is a cultural challenge that we have in Australia, in our communities, or what have you. And so I just thought we'd offer you some change thinking that might help this conversation. So we always say this, I've been saying this for 25 years, if we are to survive, let alone thrive, we do need to change in how we're doing things, because the world keeps shifting around us on whatever scale that you're thinking about here. We can't keep doing what we've always done. I just posted this morning on LinkedIn a comment about the most 6 expensive words in businesses. We've always done it that way. So it's about how do we keep going and change what we're doing. And what I'm talking about here is, some of you may or may not have heard of this word, but a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift. It's important that we actually, I guess, think about doing something different, and potentially even us as individuals may not have held some of that thinking, or it's happened to us. But if we're completely honest, we may have held some ageist thinking. So it's about how do we actually shift paradigms. So I've got a few tips for you. But making change happen can be hard. It can be really, really hard to shift, but it can only start with us. And I think that's the key part, is that you can choose to make a change. in how you respond and how you do things, because you can't change other people. Maria often talks about she's tried that over many years, particularly in her family, and it hasn't worked. So it's about how do we influence others and how they think. And I guess one of the things that we talked about, Maria and I, in prepping for this, is the way you respond to a situation has the power to change the situation. So it does come back to us as individuals as to how we respond and how others may follow our lead in doing that process. So it's like the old ripple effect, how we can actually start with ourselves and ever since I've met Patricia about 6 months ago, I've been talking to people all over the world about ageism now, because I feel very inspired. I hadn't thought about it up until, and I always used to think it was for an older person thing, but I've started to watch the younger person. I've got a niece who's struggling to get employment as well, and because she feels, or they say, oh, maybe you don't have enough experience. So it's the ripple effect of how we can't change the world, but we can change how we react and do things. The fabulous Maria Nolan said this: change happens best and lasts longest when it's a choice and not forced. So it's not about, I don't think, no one here today is professing that we go out and tell people you shouldn't be ageist, you know, that sort of stuff. It's more about how we role model. So people start to go, oh, I'm intrigued, Tracy, tell me more about that. And then they get more awareness and they can choose then to maybe shift their thinking. And I think that's where in any change, whether it's this thing about ageism or any change you're going through, if you try to force it on people, you know yourself, people tend to react. It's about how you can actually listen to people and help them choose to go with you. So we have a model here called ADKAR: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And Mary and I had a wonderful conversation a few weeks ago about this, and like I said, having met Patricia about 6 months ago, she's really helped raise my awareness as to what. So if you help raise people's awareness, they then will go to number 2, which is desire, to say, well, maybe I do need to change how I think. And so, because we can't force it on people. I like to say that decide, sometimes not so much desire, but then how we actually can do that, then get good at it at number 4, and then make sure it sticks. So this could even be like changing your workplace, whether it is about how diversity, inclusion, even something as technical as a software change. A lot of people go in at number 3, if not 4, and they want people just to be able to do it. But it's about how we actually slow down and actually raise people's awareness and understanding, and so they can choose themselves at number 2, to back up Maria's quote. So it's called the ADKAR model: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And we thought this one was really helpful for the ageism conversation. So how can we reduce it? How can we spread the word? Is start raising awareness. Start raising awareness about why we need to do this, you know, what happens if we don't, so people will choose to come with it. So what's the nature of what we're saying? Why do we need to change? What's the risk of not changing? All those, I guess, why questions and benefits. So if you're trying to influence in your organisation or even in your family, it's starting at the awareness piece about why they need to do that. Because if you don't build awareness, people won't understand why they've got to do it. So it's about slowing that message down so people can choose then to have that personal motivation. They, like I said, sometimes move it from desire to decide, okay, I'm going to be quite supportive of this whole ageism conversation, but not because someone told me to be, because Patricia Sparrow told me to be. It's because I want to be. And that's the key, is that's how we have to get this message out. I believe using change management theory is helping people choose to get on the bus about this. And it's education will actually help that. Because if you don't, people will resist. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me that sort of stuff. So it's about how we can support people to choose and make their own choice to do that. And then how do we do that? How do we get on and do it, and so forth? The knowledge of how we make it stick. Because if people don't know how to do this, like some of that literature you were talking about, Patricia, and other things, if we've got some knowledge and got some things we can share, that's when we can move forward. So it's really about understanding then how we can continue to get better at this. And I think I've got a slide further up. I'll touch on ability a little bit more. It's about, if people don't get good at this and having the conversation, it won't work. It won't fail. And then it's reinforcement. So in summary, it's the ADKAR model, which can be applied to many of your changes, but we thought it was quite relevant for this particular conversation around how do we change the thinking, shift the dial, moving it away from ageist conversations. So there, in summary, it is awareness. Why we've got to do it? Why now? Why? And then asking yourself, well, why do I want to do this? Why would I be passionate about this? For example, Maria gave her very heartfelt example of her mum. That's why she's very passionate about it. And that's why she's on board, and she's now having conversations with other people. So what do we need to do? So that's sometimes the question. Well, so how do we change it? What do we need to do? And that's where we'll take guidance from people like you, Patricia, is like, what do we need to do, which you're going to give us shortly. And for me, to get good at this and having conversations with people, it's trying some new ways and learning from the experiences. Not every conversation you have with people to help them raise their awareness and desire is going to go brilliantly, but it's like, oh, I didn't do that very well, but I can learn from that experience so we can stick with a new way. So trying to influence thinking and change thinking doesn't just happen because we tell people to. It's about helping them choose, and giving good examples like Patricia's given will help that. So there's a bit of change theory to add to the how do we reduce the ageism conversation. And to you, Patricia, this is what you were saying. This is what you think needs to happen. So if you talk us through your slide.
Did it myself. I'll put myself on mute. Yeah, so look, what needs to happen? And I think it's really good because we do need the attitudinal change, and we need examples. And one of the things that I am looking at is how do we get some really clear things that you can do as an individual that will help. A lot of our advocacy is based on how do we make a systemic change. And so one of the things that we need government to do is to do a whole of government strategy on ageing. So there are about 9 million people over the age of 50 in Australia, and we're growing, but we don't really look at a strategy for an ageing Australia. And when we do, we often, you know, when the government does, although this year was a welcome relief when we talk about Intergenerational Report, older people were always presented like a natural disaster. There's a tsunami of older people coming. It's going to be terrible. This year, I think the government was quite clear about their language about older people as contributors throughout their lives, and how that needs to be respected. But we still think we need to look at, and the challenge for government is how we do this in a way that's a positive strategy on ageing, doesn't fall into the intergenerational kind of warfare, which, you know, we do doing increasing work with younger groups who want to see older people get a fair deal, just as many of the older people that we talk to want to make sure that, you know, younger people get a fair deal. So I think there's building on that, but there are things that government has to tackle about an ageing population, including things like aged care, but also, you know, planning and tax and all of those things. And some of you will know I was at a tax summit this morning. So it's a range of things that we need a whole of government strategy on ageing. And then one of the things that we think is really important is that there needs to be a collaborative overhaul, which we're not very good at sometimes in this country, in a federated structure. But there are a range of discriminatory laws and policies and practices. Some of them we talked about this morning, a little bit earlier, sorry. We need an overhaul at the Commonwealth, state and territory legislation to look at what are the ageist things that we should be changing in laws that actually do create this systemic ageism. And some of them are around banking and what they can and can't do. And when you tackle banks on some of that, they say it's attached to some kind of international banking law. So it's within Australia. It's myth busting, where people sometimes will say it's attached to something that maybe it's not. It's just easier to say that than do something about it. And so we've got to get much tighter on what are the laws that need to be changed, what are the policies that need to be changed. And this is driving that systemic change. And the other thing that Australia hasn't signed up for yet, also quite shocking, is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Older People. Like I said earlier, we're about to introduce a new Aged Care Act that will be on rights. It's appalling that it hasn't been on rights all this time. And what that does, people kind of go, oh, you know, what does a UN convention do? What it actually does is gives a definitive universal position that ageism is morally and legally unacceptable. And I think you have to have that kind of approach to be able to address it. And it does provide legally binding protection then with accountability. And Australia has to report then on what it's doing to uphold the rights of older people. And it goes back to the point that was raised earlier in the question session about, you know, asking businesses to report on gender. Let's ask them to also report on ageist attitudes and practices and employment practices that are discriminatory, and build it up from that. So it's United Nations sometimes seems like that's a long way out for people, but this is actually how we create some transparency and require people to actually report and start to address it. And unfortunately with things, you often, I know what you're saying, you want people to make the change, Tracy, and that's true, particularly at an individual level, but we have to sort of drive a change at system level. And sometimes businesses and things like that actually do need to have a requirement to do so before they're going to do it. So there are some of the things that we're advocating for. We're always looking at what our asks are and of government and how we make them more compelling. So if there are things that you think of, you know, let us know. But they're our big asks around ageism, and we're working much more about how do we work to get that attitudinal change, and what sorts of training can we put in place, and what things can we do. So anybody's input and feedback on that as we tackle it as a community is more than welcome.
I really like your point there, Patricia, about what I was talking about was at the personal level, but there's only so many people who will choose to do that, you know. So it's about how do we actually get the bigger systemic stuff happening, which for some people then will be an unchosen change, but it's like, how do we actually then make sure that it becomes part of how we move forward in this.
And
country.
language, I think you touched on too. Language is so important. I heard a fabulous linguist talk about how just about any time we use the word old, it's got a negative connotation. And sort of changing some of that becomes really important too. It's the way we talk about it.
Thank you, Patricia. So we're going to just have the next breakout room only for 5 minutes because we're drawing to a close of the webinar. But this one is about at a personal level. So what could you do? What can you do to reduce ageism? And Patricia's given us some really good examples of the systemic, but it's pulling it down to you. What can you do personally to do that? And I shared my two good friends here, Kath and Kim. It's all about me. It's about you in this sense. Is there anything you can do now? Because we've got people working like Patricia, working really hard to get the government work going. But what can you do? Can you contribute and support Patricia and her team in what they do? What is it that you can do? Because for things to change, I first must change. There's another little bit of change management thinking, a change in how we approach things. So, Leanne, can we just go in for 5 minutes, please, into the same breakout rooms, if that's not too much of a problem for you to organise? And just let's have a conversation around this. What could you do after today, when you go and leave today and you catch up with people on the weekend? What could you do? Or in the next few months, what could you do?
So if you want to go in the same breakout rooms, I'll just throw you in there now.
Yeah,
5 minutes. Yep.
Thank you. About what you could do to reduce ageism. Is Maria there? Are you with me?
Sorry, I missed the start of what you said. We were still coming back. We were in depth, Maria and Sophia and Maria.
Okay. What a summary?
The basic summary. Yeah, Maria and Sophia were both saying that it's really got to occur at a systemic level. You know, it's very hard to change people's attitudes. And then I guess I was using a specific example, which Maria was relating back to. I can make a difference by, you know, mentioning it to people about how they're treating mum in the facility. That would be what I can do. But I guess Maria was then saying, yes, but we need to have targeted approaches for different reasons, you know, for different places, for different things that are happening. And I guess also that we need to, we just need to make sure that we're finding out why people, what do they get out of still thinking in an ageist way, you know, because that's the WIFM. What's in it for me to continue thinking the way I do, as opposed to why won't I change that thinking? What am I going to lose if I change that thinking?
Yeah, what do I lose? Thanks, Maria. Patricia, what about your group? What were some of the things that your group were talking about?
Sian's going to do a report back.
Oh,
I am.
excellent, Sian.
So we were saying that as an all-women group, how we are really conscious of elevating the voices of young people. And so we often, we focus in on young people and we want to remove the barriers that we've perhaps faced ourselves in our youth. But by doing that, we're probably inadvertently making people at the other end of the continuum more invisible. So finding a happy balance of doing the both, bringing in the experience of people at the other end of the continuum to counter the younger generations. That was kind of the crux of what we were talking about.
Thank you, Sian. Thank you very much for reporting back. Well, our group, Ash or Marguerite might jump in, but we had a really lively conversation, I thought, and we talked about, Marguerite kicked it off with, we were talking about getting a job, and she said, I could change up how I do it. I could door knock a bit more, or I could go and see people and talk to them. But Marguerite had a really good suggestion about stop referring to herself as old or the old fossil. I think that was your words, wasn't it, Marguerite, that you said? And join in with the younger people in your life and saying, well, how collectively can we approach XYZ or whatever it is? So it's us not putting ourselves down. And I think, Ash, you were saying similar, remove the barriers that we might ourselves put up and what we say or how we refer to ourselves as being older. Also, Ash was talking about mentorship, which I think is wonderful. Seniorship and mentorship, how can we bridge that, how we can share knowledge. Coming from an agricultural background, I've seen a lot of retired farmers who retire and then they're like, what do I do? They're such practical people and they want to give, but it's about how they can utilise their knowledge working with people who would like to hear it. So that mentorship could actually help with that process. So yeah, that was what we talked about in the rooms. Pat, I guess I wanted to now ask you for your call to action. Yeah. What are we going to do? What are we going to do to help you?
What we want to do is we want to eliminate ageism, and it's great that we're all focusing on, what we can do individually. But our job, I guess, is to make the case to government about why they should make some of these changes. And what we know a couple of things about what encourages government to act. One is that there's a large number of people who care about it, and that if they don't take action, they'll feel it at an election. And so we would get you to come along and be a subscriber. It doesn't cost you anything, but it helps us to talk about the number of people who care about the issues facing older Australians. The other thing that we'll be doing is, we're a small charitable based service. We're also looking at how we can get corporates involved, and if there are people that that you think would want to come along with us in trying to tackle this, that would be fantastic. We have to make it on the case of the numbers of people who care about it, the economic benefits as well as the social benefits for the country in actually addressing ageism. So if you think you can lend your support by subscribing to our newsletter, introducing us to businesses that who might be interested in giving us support to push this message and to really hone our asks and get them out there, we'd love to hear from you. So please join us as we work to eliminate ageism, which hurts us all.
Oh, wow. That's a good call to action. I'm signing up straight after this. Actually, I think I already am signed up. So, yeah, and I really like that point that it does that systemic stuff. You've taken me there today, Patricia. I think it's about how we can influence governments and our local members and everything else that are getting in, that we need this, and the corporate support would be useful. Maria, you had one last word to say before I hand to Lynn to finish.
Great. I would just like to read you a quote that I think Tracy and I think is very apt, and you may or may not have heard this quote before, and if you'd like to close your eyes to think while I'm speaking, that sometimes helps, but just a reminder about our power as human beings. So it's the Bishop's quote: "When I was young and free and my imagination had no limits, I dreamed of changing the world. As I grew older and wiser, I discovered the world would not change, so I shortened my sights somewhat and I decided to change my country, but it seemed immovable. As I grew into my twilight years in one last desperate attempt, I settled for changing only my family, those closest to me. but alas, they would have none of it. And now I realise, as I lie on my deathbed, if I'd only changed myself first, then by example, I might have changed my family. From their aspirations and encouragement, I would have been able to better my country, and who knows, I might have even changed the world. The inscription from the tomb of an Anglican bishop in Westminster Abbey.
One of my all-time
What a
faves.
great quote.
It's a good one, isn't it? It's a good one. So yeah, thank you very much. We've enjoyed it. If you'd like to link in with us, we'd love to stay in touch, and with you too, Patricia. Yeah, I've really enjoyed the conversations. Lynn, I'd like to just hand to you to do the summary of.
Yeah, well, what an incredible deep dive. I thought it was going to be a long session, and it's gone so quickly because there's so much to cover. Thanks, LJ's put in the COTA in newsletter subscription in the chat box link there. For those of
You're
you
on LinkedIn,
listening to the
Facebook
recording.
too.
Yeah,
you're on
COTA.
Facebook. We'll follow you on there. I found a great article on Bunnings' value of experience that just came out today in the HR AMAG, and I'll pop that in the chat box as well. I'm actually a strategic consultant with various clients, and I'm going to be looking at setting up a multi-generational agenda on each of our agendas on our strategic planning. I think that would be great to look at and bringing into our diversity and inclusion metrics more around how we are actually ensuring that we've got a good cross-section of ages across our workforce, from youth to seniors. I think it'll be really good to see more of that diversity and inclusion piece added into even community metrics, and getting more showcase stories on some of our more senior members, and also creating, I think, the opportunity for cross generational teams, bringing that to our social clubs, getting them to start thinking about having one event a year that they have to have a mixed generation team. It might be a quiz night team, or maybe a team associated with the billiards nights or whatever it is, but actually start bringing in to our processes and our current programs this as an agenda. And I think that can be very then easily become the part of the conversation that comes into our everyday enterprises. I'm also looking at reverse date stamping and reviewing our recruitment strategies to take names off. Obviously, there's cultural issues, and I'm mentoring and have been mentoring at UWA students who, very beginning of their careers. I've been doing that for over 10 years now, and I absolutely, totally encourage anyone to get involved in local mentoring programs, particularly through TAFE and universities, where that is already then a multi-generational experience for you to be keeping in contact. It's great because those kids having us involved and us involved and them involved in our lives just creates so much of those barriers to be broken down around stereotypes to do with age. And also, I think that if we look at the knowledge that's been developed by those examples of the young people going into aged care centres, creating opportunities for mixing of people. I find that most people that come from an unconscious bias around race or around age or around gender are coming from the fact that they haven't had enough experiences with people that are different. And so every opportunity that we can in enterprise, in business, in our organisations, whether they're in the for-purpose or the for-profit space, need to be thinking about how to create those opportunities where they collaborate and co-create together across different ages, across different cultures, and across different genders. So this has definitely raised some very practical ideas I can take away straight away and implement. I'm also looking at some of our exercise and movement programs that some of my clients have been doing in the wellbeing space, to actually get them to actually think about and bring into their agenda for their programming for next year. Some special kind of fun things that they could be doing, maybe getting one of their more senior people to run their yoga classes, because it always seems to be done by the younger ones, but some of our more senior people are actually better at yoga and so super flexible. They could be leading those programs as well. And even if they're not like me, and everyone can have a laugh at my expense, that's always interesting. It's also fun to bring some fun and humour into all these great ideas. And I would love to see more of us sharing. I've put in that article about Bunnings. Let's share these stories. These are great stories. We need to share them out on LinkedIn, share them out, create conversations. Tracy, you're the queen at that stuff, you know, tagging people to get them involved in those conversations. This is raising awareness and conversations. So I'm just, you know, that was while you guys were in the breakout room, that's 10 ideas I was able to smash out in, what was it, 5 minutes. If I can do that, I'm sure anyone else who's listening to this recording, anyone else who's, I'd like to put that out there to let's get the conversations going. What are all these great ideas that we can share? I would love to see us sign up for the UN Rights for Older People. I'll be doing everything I can to support that. So if there's anything the Business Women Australia can do to, you know, write and endorse or help with any of these kinds of initiatives, please, Patricia, we're right behind you. We really care about what what you stand for, and anything we can do, you know, please let us know. Perhaps we'll maybe do another one this time next year, Tracy, and see what we've learned over a year, see what kind of implementation and issues and ideas and programs that we're all experimenting with, and come back and share it.
Be fantastic.
Great idea.
So thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. For those of you who made this a priority to be able to be on here, well done you, because prioritising ourselves and leading the way and making these issues really important front and centre is a part of bringing the change in the world that we want to be.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks for having us.
Much. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.